Elsie Rowan did not knock on the widow's door so much as brace her shoulder against it, one arm around little Wren, the other dragging 12-year-old Cora close. When the door opened, lamplight fell across three girls stiff with cold, and Elsie lifted her chin with the last bit of pride she had left. "Please let my sisters stay warm tonight." The widow stood in a plain dark dress with flour on one cuff and a coal shovel in her hand. Behind her came the smell of coffee, pine smoke, and bread gone hard by the stove. She looked first at Wren's bare ankles, then at Cora's cracked lips, then at Elsie's face, as if measuring not only what the cold had done, but what it had failed to do. Before we go any farther, settle in wherever you are and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We always like knowing who's gathered by the fire before the story takes hold. Mara Bell stepped aside. Get inside before the cold finishes what it started. The warmth hurt. It needled Elsie's skin and filled her lungs so fast she nearly wept from it. Wren made a weak little sound and folded into the nearest chair. Cora tried to untie her boots, but her fingers shook too badly. Mara set down the shovel, poured warm water into a basin, and said, "Sit." "Will not be trouble," Elsie answered. That wasn't the question. There was no softness in Mara's voice, but there was no meanness either. She knelt and washed the blood from Elsie's torn heel herself. The room was neat to the point of loneliness. One rocker by the hearth, jars lined in strict rows, a Bible on the table with a dried sage leaf marking a page. No clutter, no laughter, no sign that anybody had come through that door for comfort in a very long time. "You walk from town?" Mara asked. "Farther." "Anyone following?" Elsie looked at the door. That was enough. Mara went to the window and lifted the curtain a finger's width. Outside, evening had flattened into iron-colored dusk. The windmill turned with a tired creak. The barn sat black beyond the yard. Good country for hiding if a person knew it. Bad country if they did not. "What are your names?" "Elsie. This is Cora." "And Wren?" Mara nodded once. "I've got stew. You'll eat before talking." It was mostly potatoes and onion with a little stringy beef in it, but the girls ate as if they had fallen onto treasure. Cora cried into her bowl after the second spoonful and turned away so no one would see. Wren fell asleep before she finished. Mara said nothing. She fed the stove, fetched blankets from a cedar chest, and moved with the plain efficiency of somebody who had learned panic was a waste of strength. Only when the bowls were empty did she sit across from Elsie and fold her hands. "Tell it plain." Elsie swallowed. The heat had loosened her enough for fear to come back full force. "My father kept winter accounts on Gideon Pike's spread. 3 nights ago he told me if anything happened, I was to take my sisters and come west to the Bell place. Said you'd know what kind of man Pike was." Something flickered in Mara's face. Recognition, not surprise. "Before dawn yesterday our cabin caught fire," Elsie went on. "Too quick for a stove spark. Pa got Cora out. I got Wren. Roof came down before he could reach the door." Cora made a broken sound. Elsie pulled a small oilskin packet from inside her coat. "Pa shoved this at me and said not to let Pike get it." Mara did not touch it. "What is it?" "Ledger pages. Names. Payments. Land markers. I can't read all of it." "Can Pike?" "He can read enough to kill for it." The stove popped. The mantel clock gave a dry little tick. "Why me?" Mara asked quietly. Elsie hesitated. "Pa said your husband once tried standing against Pike. Said that's why he ended up dead under a wagon nobody saw tip." For a long moment Mara did not move. Then she stood. "There's a back room," she said. "Small, but it holds heat. Cora takes the cot. Wren with her. You'll have the trundle." Cora looked up, stunned. "You're making up beds?" "3 of them." She said it like an ordinary thing, but her hands were not quite steady when she opened the room. It had been shut a long time. Cedar, dust, and the faint ghost of lavender drifted out. Mara beat the mattresses, tucked hot stones wrapped in cloth beneath the quilts, and left 3 cups of warm milk on the washstand. Wren, half asleep, whispered, "Do we got to leave before daylight?" Mara tucked the blanket under her chin. "No one's leaving till they can stand straight." Elsie ought to have thanked her. Instead she said, "If Pike comes, he'll not knock." Mara blew out one lamp and left another burning low. "Neither do I, when it matters." Elsie lay awake a long time listening to the house. Mara checked the latches, banked the stove, stepped onto the porch once with the shotgun that hung by the kitchen door. Somewhere close to dawn, The place settled around them with a long sigh of timber, and Elsie thought maybe that was what safety sounded like when it had forgotten its own voice. The pounding came at sunrise. Not a knock, a demand. Wren jerked awake. Cora sat straight up. Mara opened the bedroom door, already dressed, gray eyes clear and hard. Stay here. No, Elsie said. Mara held her gaze, then nodded. Then keep behind me. Horses stamped in the yard. Tack rang in the cold. Mara opened the front door and filled it. Sheriff Tom Vickers stood on the porch rolling an unlit cigar between his teeth. Beside him sat Gideon Pike on a glossy bay horse, broad in a fine coat with fur at the collar. He wore comfort the way other men wore rank. Morning, Widow Bell, Pike said smoothly. I'm here for what's mine. You're early for courtesy, Mara said. Vickers lifted a paper. Complaints been made concerning 3 runaway minors and stolen business records. By who? Pike smiled without warmth. By the man feeding half this county. Elsie stepped into view before Mara could stop her. Pike's eyes found her at once. There you are, he said softly. I was beginning to think the cold had taken you too. Wren whimpered from the hall. Pike heard that and smiled thinner. Now, widow, I'll spare us all trouble. Hand over the girls and the packet. The 2 older ones can be placed respectable. The little one as well, if she learns obedience. You keep out of it, and I'll speak to the bank about the note on this place. Hard winters visit everybody. So that was his shape. He already knew Mara's mortgage was near due. He had arrived with chain in hand, only pretending to ask whose neck it should close around. Mara took the paper from Vickers, read it once, and looked up. This isn't a warrant. It's a petition for temporary custody signed by a justice who's never seen these girls. Pike's gaze sharpened. You read legal papers now? I read anything a man waves at my door and hopes I'm too female to understand. Then she tore the paper in half. The sound was small. The consequence was not. You want those girls, she said, letting the pieces fall at Pike's feet. You come back with a circuit order and enough men to explain to the county why you needed them. Pike leaned lower in the saddle. You've made yourself part of this now. I expect I have. He looked past her shoulder toward the warm house and the hallway where 3 made beds still waited. Then when I return, I won't be asking. He wheeled the horse hard enough to spray the porch with frozen mud. Vickers followed him out through the gate. Mara shut the door. The latch dropped home. Nothing, Elsie knew then, would ever be as it had been the night before. Mara laid the packet on the table, set coffee on the stove, and opened the ledger pages. Figures, names, acreage marks, relief allotments. She read in silence, mouth growing flatter by the line. It's theft dressed as paperwork, she said at last. Coal money for widows that never reached them. Feed tallies padded so wide a blind mule could see it. And here, she tapped one survey page. Pike Creek. Your father's cabin stood on a spring lined the railroad once for water. Pike's been pushing families off the land before the rail men arrive with money. So it was never just the accounts, Elsie said. No, it was the ground under your feet. Cora's voice shook. Can this send him to jail? It can send him to ruin, if it reaches the right eyes. Mara folded the packet closed. Circuit Judge Albright is due in Mason Crossing tomorrow evening. If we get this to him, Pike can't swallow it quiet. Then I'll go, Elsie said. You'll be stopped before the creek. I know back draws. I know willow breaks. I know how to stay low. Mara looked at her torn heel. And you know what happens when pride outruns strength. By noon the story had outrun the ranch. Mrs. Finch from the boarding house came with biscuits and news, flowers still on her sleeves. Men at the mercantile were saying Widow Bell had stolen Pike's wards. At the smithy, Abel Dunn kept striking iron too hard each time Pike's name came up. In the churchyard, 2 women who had accepted Pike's Christmas hams were already praying over female stubbornness. Mara listened to all of it without comment. Then she took Elsie to the barn. The air inside was warm with hay and horse breath. A rangy sorrel mare kicked her stall the moment they entered, ears pinned flat. Don't go near Daisy when she's in a temper, Mara said. Elsie had already stepped forward. She did not grab for the halter. She stood just outside striking range and breathed slow enough for another creature to borrow it. Then she clicked once with her tongue. The mare's ears flicked. Her hoof came down. Elsie laid a hand on the trembling neck and the fear under the hide eased by degrees. Mara watched in silence. My pa said horses know lying before people do, Elsie murmured. Your pa was right. Elsie kept her hand on the mare. We should leave tonight, before Pike brings more men. You've done enough. Enough is what people say when they want a clean conscience cheap. Mara picked up a curry brush, then set it down again. Listen to me. A house turns cold long before the fire dies. It happens when folks stop expecting anyone to come through the door. I've lived in a cold house long enough. It was the first true thing Mara had said about herself, and it landed harder than a shout. Elsie swallowed. Pike offered to clear your note if you handed us over. He did. You could still take it. I could. Mara opened the stall and led Daisy into the aisle. And then I'd hear your little sister ask every winter night whether being warm was worth the price. I expect I'd die of that long before the bank took my roof. That evening Sheriff Vickers rode back alone. He stayed on his horse in the yard, jaw working the dead cigar. I shouldn't be here, he said. Then don't waste my lamp oil, Mara called. Vickers looked toward the windows where the girls' shadows moved. Pike's called in 3 ranch hands from the south line. Says he's collecting what's his before dawn. He's also bought himself a statement from Justice Bream, claiming those girls are better off indentured than wandering. Indentured where? Elsie asked from the doorway. Vickers would not meet her eyes. One in the hotel kitchen. One up at Pike's house. Little one may be sent to the mission. Wren heard that and began to cry in angry, frightened gulps. Mara's hand tightened on the porch rail. Why tell us? The sheriff rubbed his jaw. Because there are things a man can excuse in himself till he hears a child crying through a shut door. He rode off into the dusk before anybody answered. Night came clear and hard. No clouds. No mercy in the stars. Mara barred the doors, shuttered the lamps, loaded the shotgun, and spread the papers across the kitchen table again. Here's what he wants most, she said, tapping the survey. If he gets the spring line and the relief ledgers vanish, he keeps his money, his land, and his good name. Cora drew her knees to her chest. What would you have done, she asked into the quiet, if you were Elsie? Would you keep running, or trust somebody and stand? That is the kind of question a story lays in your hands when it wants more than your ears. If you had been in Elsie's place that night, would you have trusted Mara Bell with everything you had left? No one answered, because the first shot came from the barn. Glass burst. A horse screamed. Mara was moving before the sound died. Bucket line. Cora, Wren, cellar. Elsie with me. They ran into a cold so sharp it scraped the back of the throat. Flames climbed one side of the barn where oil had been thrown. Daisy battered the stall door. Men moved beyond the firelight. 3 shapes. Maybe 4. Short breaths. Fast hands. Elsie grabbed the latch, hissed when hot metal burned her palm, and flung the stall open. Daisy bolted. Another horse fought the traces in the harness shed. Elsie caught his face in both hands and drove her own fear down where he could not smell it. Easy now. Easy. Behind her Mara fired once. A man cursed. Another shot cracked from the dark. Wood splintered over the shed post. Elsie slashed the team loose and sent them toward the creek gate so they would not burn. As she turned back, a hand seized her coat and yanked her off balance. Gideon Pike. He smelled of cigar leaf and soap, ridiculous things to notice with the barn burning behind him. Pack it, he said. Elsie drove her elbow into his ribs and tore loose, but Pike caught a fistful of her hair. Then Wren screamed from the house, and every part of Elsie went cold. You should have run while running was free, Pike said. Mara came out of the smoke with the shotgun held like a club and smashed the barrel across his shoulder. He staggered. She shoved Elsie toward the house. Get your sisters. Inside, the front room was wrecked. One window smashed. Frost on the boards. Cora had dragged Wren halfway to the cellar door while a ranch hand reached through the broken sash, trying to hook the child by the arm. Elsie snatched the iron poker from the hearth and swung with both hands. Bone cracked. The man dropped out of sight with a howl. Cellar, Elsie said. No, Cora gasped. He's at the back too. The kitchen door shuttered under a kick. Mara came in backward, breathing hard. Upstairs. End room. Bolt it. What about you? Move. They ran. Wren sobbing. Cora dragging a quilt. Elsie shoved the girls into the back room and dropped the bolt just as men crashed below. Then she remembered the packet. It was still on the kitchen table. For one terrible second, she nearly opened the door and ran back for it. Mara's voice rose from below, fierce enough to nail her in place. You want what's in that packet, Gideon? Come through me. A chair overturned. Glass broke. Then Pike's calm voice answered. You always did mistake stubbornness for virtue, Mara. Another voice came from downstairs. Sheriff Vickers. Enough. Silence. Heavy. Then Pike said, You've picked a side poorly. No, Vickers answered. Picked it late. A gunshot exploded. Somebody hit the stair rail hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Then Mara shouted one word up the stairwell. Run. Elsie snatched the back window open, shoved Cora out onto the lean-to roof. Then Wren. Then followed into air sharp enough to steal speech. Behind them the bedroom door splintered. Cora jumped first. Wren froze. Elsie pulled her close. Look at me, she whispered. Not down. Me. Wren's hands clamped around her neck. Elsie eased her over the edge and dropped with her. Pain shot up her torn heel the moment she landed. No time. They ran bent low toward the creek. At the cottonwoods, Sheriff Vickers came out of the dark, clutching his side, blood black on his coat. The widow's got him held a minute, he rasped, shoving the oilskin packet into Elsie's hands. Not longer. You got it. From the table. Listen to me. He swayed. Pike killed your father. Not the fire. I heard him say it. Said the fool wouldn't tell where he'd hidden the survey copy. Cora made a strangled sound. There's more, Vickers said, gripping Elsie's sleeve. Your pa mailed a second copy to the church office in Mason Crossing. Pastor keeps county records in the same safe. Pike doesn't know which envelope. Light swung closer through the trees. What about Mara? Elsie asked. The sheriff looked back toward the house where shadows crossed the windows like fighting ghosts. If she's still standing, she'll expect you to do the one thing all this blood was spent for. A gunshot cracked from the yard. Then another. Then silence. Elsie took her sister's hands and ran into the frozen dark, not knowing whether Mara Bell lived, only knowing the whole world had narrowed to one packet under her coat and Wren's broken breath beside her. They made the line shack before dawn because there was nowhere else left to make it. The place leaned against a stand of juniper, half buried in drifted snow and smelling of old ash, pine pitch, and mice. Elsie got a fire going with the last dry tinder she could find. Wren cried at last in small, hiccuping bursts. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm sorry I was scared. Hush now. Elsie whispered, though her own voice was fraying. Scared just means you were paying attention. The latch lifted behind her. Elsie snatched for the poker, but it was Mara Bell who stepped in and shut the door against the cold. For one heartbeat, none of them moved. Then Wren launched herself at the widow so hard it drove a sound out of Mara that was almost a laugh and almost grief. She had blood dried on one temple. Her sleeve was torn. One eye was already darkening. But she was upright. Elsie's knees nearly gave. How? Vickers bought us time. Mara crouched with a wince and touched Cora's cheek, then Elsie's scorched hand. He got the worst of it. Told me where you'd head. Is he alive? Mara held her gaze, and that was answer enough. Loss entered the room and sat down among them without asking leave. Mara unwound her scarf and bound Elsie's burned palm. Pike will say I kidnapped you. He'll say Vickers died stopping us. He'll ride into Mason Crossing with half the county behind him. Then we go before daylight, Elsie said. To the church. Together. Cora watched them with swollen eyes. Why are you doing all this for us? Mara sat back on her heels. Firelight found the fine lines around her mouth, the years of holding herself rigid against sorrow. Because I had 2 boys once. One died in a coughing fever. The other froze in a wagon drift waiting on a doctor who took Pike's Road crew money to clear the South Pass first. My husband went after them and came home in a pine box. After that I shut my house and called it strength. She looked at Wren asleep against her shoulder. It wasn't strength. It was hunger teaching itself not to ask. No one spoke for a while. The branch outside rubbed the roof with a dry whisper. At last Elsie stared into the little fire and said, I've been mothering them so long I forgot I'm not old enough to know how. Mara tied off the bandage. That's the secret nobody tells. Most mothers are learning the child same as the child is learning them. Cora turned away fast, wiping her face. Mara reached into her pocket and drew out a small carved wooden bird, worn smooth by years. This belonged to my youngest, she said, placing it in Wren's hand. He carried it in his coat because he believed carved things held warmth longer than real ones. Elsie stared. You shouldn't give that away. Mara's mouth softened. You do not owe the dead your loneliness. It was the truest thing Elsie had ever heard. and it broke something open in her so quietly she did not know she was crying until Mara leaned forward and touched her forehead, brief and gentle, to hers. If this story is moving you, then you are exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe is a small way of saying there should be more places in the world where tenderness still gets to matter. They left in the blue dark before sunrise, taking the creek bed where tracks hid poorly on frozen stone. Cora rode Daisy. Wren sat wrapped before Mara on the gelding. Elsie walked when the ice thinned, one hand on the bridle, the other holding the packet beneath her coat. Mason Crossing was waking when they reached it. Smoke rose from chimneys. A wagon rattled toward market. Church bell not yet rung. Mara led them straight to the clapboard church at the end of Main, where Pastor Ruel Knox, a narrow man with spectacles always slipping down his nose, answered the side door in shirt sleeves and alarm. He listened without interruption. Then he opened the office safe with shaking hands and brought out a sealed envelope. Inside lay a second survey copy in Amos Rowan's hand and a sworn letter naming Pike's falsified accounts, the burned cabins, the relief money, and the spring line deals. "You brave fool," Mara whispered, not meaning the pastor. From the street came the drum of many horses. Pike had arrived. He dismounted before the church with 2 ranch hands, Justice Bream in a hat too fine for mourning, and enough frightened townsmen behind him to make lying look official. His coat was spotless. Only the sling on one arm hinted somebody had landed a worthy blow the night before. "There they are," he called for half the square to hear. "Widow Bell, having stolen my wards and the county records that prove it." "Funny thing about records," Mara said. "They tend to keep both sides." Judge Albright's carriage rolled into the square at that moment, dust gray on the wheels. He stepped down stiff and travel-worn, already irritated at being made a public exhibit before breakfast. Pike spread his hands with sorrow practiced to a polish. "Your Honor, I regret this ugliness, but the widow has been misled by a dead man's daughter." "Then let the dead man speak," Mara said, placing the letters in the judge's hands herself. Everything after that happened fast, then slower than anyone could stand. Albright read. Pastor Knox confirmed the date Amos had left the envelope. Mrs. Finch stepped from the crowd and declared that 3 widows on her boarding route had received no coal despite Pike's books claiming otherwise. Abel Dunn took off his apron and admitted he had shooed Pike's men for midnight rides to cabins later found burned. One by one, the people Pike had counted on to stay small discovered the queer courage of seeing they were no longer alone. Pike's calm cracked first at the edges. He called Mara hysterical, called Elsie coached, called Vickers a drunk. Then the judge read aloud the line, naming Pike as the man who paid to clear the wrong past the winter Mara's boy froze waiting on a doctor, and the square changed shape around him. Everybody in Mason Crossing knew that story. Everybody knew whose child it had been. Pike looked, all at once, like what he was. Not a provider, not a necessary man, not the county's sturdy pillar, but a thief who had grown fat on other people's winters. He lunged for the papers. Elsie moved before she thought. She caught the judge's fallen dispatch box as Pike struck it loose, swung low, and drove the brass corner into Pike's knee. He buckled, tried to rise. Mara stepped in and leveled Vickers's revolver at his chest. "Stay down." Pike laughed through his teeth. "You shoot me, widow, and men like me keep owning places like this." Mara's voice did not rise. "No, men like you keep owning places like this when women decide silence is cheaper." Behind her, Judge Albright straightened as if anger had given age a new spine. "Gideon Pike, by my authority you are charged with fraud, theft of relief funds, bribery, arson conspiracy, and unlawful coercion of minors." Deputies, chain him. Justice Bream tried to slip away. Abel Dunn caught him by the collar. The crowd did the rest with their eyes. Pike fought then. Not nobly. Not like the stories cruel men tell about themselves. He kicked, spat, and called for loyalty from men who suddenly found the ground interesting. Shackles closed over his wrists in full view of every person he had ever expected to lower theirs. Still, it was not enough for Elsie until the judge turned to her, and to Cora and Wren, and said for all the square to hear, "These girls are under the temporary protection of Mrs. Mara Bell pending restoration of the Rowan claim and any compensation owed from Mr. Pike's fraud. No indenture, no separation, no further interference." Wren let out the breath she had been holding since the porch in the dark. Cora cried openly. Mara only shut her eyes for 1 second, as though a door inside her had finally opened all the way. By afternoon, Pike's note on the Bell place had been impounded with the rest of his papers. 2 neighboring widows came forward with false debts of their own. The railroad agent froze Pike's spring claims pending review. The house he had built on stolen winters began coming apart before sunset, and he was still warm enough to feel it. Weeks later, the practical world rearranged itself, as practical worlds do. The Rowan claim was restored. County compensation and the sale of Pike's seized cattle bought seed, lumber, and 2 milk cows. Mara petitioned for guardianship, and no one in Mason Crossing stood against her. Mrs. Finch brought curtains. Abel Dunn fixed the back gate. Pastor Knox kept finding reasons to stop by with books for Cora and peppermints for Wren. As for Mara Bell's house, it was never quiet in quite the same way again. By spring, the back room had new paint and 3 pegs by the door for 3 small coats. Elsie mended tack in the evenings and still slept light, but not from fear alone. Sometimes from hearing Wren laugh in her dreams. Sometimes from catching Mara humming by the stove before dawn while bread rose in its pan. On the first warm night of planting, Elsie found Mara on the porch with a blanket over her shoulders and sat beside her without asking. They watched Cora and Wren chase fireflies in the yard until the dark grew thick with their catching jars. Mara said, almost to herself, "Some nights the Lord sends you back what winter took, just not in the shape you were waiting for." Below them, the girls' laughter drifted up through the smell of turned earth and lilac, and the lamplight from the house lay across the porch boards like a welcome that had finally learned how to stay. Next time, we'll tell the story of a scarred mail-order bride who arrived to marry a man she'd never seen, only to find the ranch still mourning a woman nobody dared speak of, and the little boy who decided she belonged there before his father ever did.